What's up, everyone? This is Andrew at FanShare Sports, and today we're going to take a look at one of our latest tools on FanShare Pro on our PGA platform, and it's the research tool. If you haven't used the research tool before, it is a great resource for pulling up historical DraftKings scoring data and researching tournament fields by a variety of different metrics and filters. So to get to the research tool, we're going to navigate to the PGA tab, drop down to FanShare Pro, and then click on research. So we are coming to you the week of the Valero Texas Open when I'm recording this video, but what we're actually going to take a look at with this tool is a little bit of a Masters preview. Obviously, the Masters is coming up in just over 10 days now, so why not get a jump on your research and take a look at some historical data that can help you get an edge this year. So the default view on the research tool is average DraftKings scoring data for the last 3 events played. Now, this particular table is not filtered by this week's event. If I wanted to filter it by this week's event, I would need to check this box, current tournament field. Then I'm going to click on Apply Filter, and that's going to filter out all the golfers in our database who are not playing in the current week's event, which I mentioned was the Valero Texas Open. So very quickly, if we want to sort by, let's say, average DraftKings points gained over the last 3 events for this week's tournament field, here are some guys that are ranking at the top. It's Jonathan Vegas, it's Jason Kokrak, no surprise, Jim Furyk, also been in very good form of late, Sungjae Im. So the default sort here again is last 3 events, and in this particular case we're looking at average DraftKings points gained. So that is our quick and easy metric for evaluating current form. Now you need to factor in things like, are there European Tour players who are playing in events that we're not capturing in our database. This is strictly PGA Tour form. Okay, so the second option in terms of how you can use this tool is to aggregate by season. If I wanted to say, look at that same DraftKings scoring data for this week's tournament field, but for every event this season, I'm going to select 2018-2019 season. I'm going to apply my filter, and we'll see how this list changes. Now we've got Ricky Fowler at the top, Matt Kuchar. Important point here is to pay attention to the TA column, which is the aggregate number of tournaments included in the sample size. So guys like Fowler and Kuchar, they've played 9 and 11 tournaments respectively, but some other guys here with a much, much smaller sample size, so you want to just factor that into your analysis. Scott Scheffler, only 1 tournament. If you click on the value in that column, you actually get this data clip that pops up with the specific events included in the sample. Okay? So that is how to use the season filter. Finally, we have the aggregate by events option. This is where you can select specific events or courses to include in your sample size. So we talked about the Masters. Let's look at the last 3 Masters tournaments, and we'll look at average DraftKings scoring leaders over those 3 events. So I'm going to the select tournament filter. I'm going to search for Masters. I see the 2018 event, 2017, 2016. I'm going to hit enter to include those events in my sample, and then again I'm going to hit apply filter. Okay, so sorting by average DraftKings points gained, no surprise, but we've got Jordan Spieth at the top, Lee Westwood, Justin Rose, John Ram, Rory McIlroy. So right away we're seeing, who the course horses are at Augusta over the past 3 years. So I would expect, a lot of these names to garner a lot of attention over the next 10 days. Augusta is one of those courses where people tend to put extra emphasis on course history. Another cool feature here in terms of aggregating by events is you can actually aggregate by event types. So you can see here the options currently are majors or WGC events. Let's look at majors. And we will include, let's say, actually for majors, you're going to go to seasons. So let's go back to the season filter, and we will include, again, the last 3 seasons. We will apply the filter, and this is going to return, we've got a 12 tournament sample, so the 4 majors, each of the last 3 seasons, and this is going to give us the average DraftKings scoring data over that sample size. Again, factoring in the number of tournaments aggregated in the sample, so don't be alarmed. Graham DeLette, he's up there, but he's only played 1 tournament. You want to see what it is, you just click on the value 2017 PGA Championship. So Brooks, again, no surprise. Most people would expect to see Brooks at the top of this list. Spieth, number 2, in terms of players with more than 1 tournament played. And then interesting to see Tiger, number 3 out of that group of golfers with more than 1 tournament played. So another really cool way to filter DraftKings scoring data over different time frames and different types of events. Now, you can also use a variety of other tournament filters here, or excuse me, types of filters, including course types. We've got link style, seaside, exposed, or courses where you can expect higher wins, Pete Dye designs, Donald Ross designs, and TPC courses. We've got the different green types. We've even got locations. So we mentioned it's the Valero Texas Open this week. If you'd like to see who's played well in Texas over the course of, say, actually let's do number of events this time. So we'll look at the last 12 events played in Texas. We will check the current tournament field box to isolate only this week's field. Apply filter. And we can see out of this week's field, Kevin Tway tops the list. That's interesting. So he's played 7 tournaments in Texas out of the last 10 that have been held. And he has scored on average, he has gained on average the most DraftKings points out of any player in this week's field, followed by Ricky Fowler, Jordan Spieth, and Jimmy Walker. Okay, so you can also filter by par 71, 72, the length of the course, and again, this is all geared around DraftKings scoring data. Now, for events dating back to January of 2018, you can also see ownership data, which includes their actual DraftKings ownership, as well as our projected ownership. So, for this week's event, Valero Texas Open, let's say we want to go back and look at the 2018 edition of this tournament and get a feel for how highly owned were the players that finished at the top of the leaderboard, we can do that. So we'll do aggregate by events. We'll select the 2018 Valero Texas Open. I'm going to hit apply filter. I don't have the current tournament field box checked here, so it's going to give me the entire 2018 field. And we can see that in terms of DraftKings scoring leaders, you know, a lot of lower owned guys here. Now, a couple chalky guys as well, like Zach Johnson, 25% owned. But Andrew Landry, 1% owned. Trey Mullinax, 5% owned. Sean O'Hare, 1% owned. Neiman, 1% owned. Putnam, 1% owned. So, you know, as is usually the case, a mix of lower owned guys and chalk, but certainly, you know, a relatively high number of sub 10% owned golfers in the top 10 and even in the top 20 here in DraftKings points. So other data you're going to see in this table, you've got the DraftKings points, you've got the average DraftKings points gained, you've got birdies, bogeys, eagles, I mean all of the data points that factor into DraftKings points aside from birdie streaks, and you've got made cuts, you've got the actual DraftKings ownership percentage as I mentioned, along with the projected ownership. TA is again aggregate tournaments included in the sample size, and finally the R squared around our ownership projections. So made cuts is actually another very useful data point. If we go back to the majors, so over the last 12 majors, let's say, who's made the most cuts? Okay, Lee Westwood. He's made every cut over the last 12 majors. That's interesting and a little bit surprising. I didn't know that myself. Brooks, Leishman, Kisner, obviously just took down the match play event this week. He's $6,700 at the Masters. He will likely soak up some ownership next week at Augusta at that price point. Obviously, has a history of playing well, at least a recent history of playing well at the majors, and in good form. So, a lot of different ways you can use this tool. So take advantage of it. It's not something a lot of our members, I think, are intimately familiar with, but there's a wealth of information here. So play around with it. Hit us up anytime on Twitter or Andrew at fansharesports.com if you have any questions at all on how to use this tool. All right, stay tuned. We're going to have more tutorial videos coming out in the next week or so, and we'll go through the remaining tools in FanShare Pro. Thanks, guys.